Storecove, and today we more focusing on IRAS reporting, which is for Singapore. And with me today, I have Aaron. Hi, Aaron. How are you today? So,
Not bad.
uh, yeah, I can hear you. So, before we start with what we have today, regard to the IRAS GST reporting, I firstly, I want to introduce Storecove for those not yet Storecove customer. So this is important for you to understand how actually Storecove API work. And there are some also out there is not really understand, and they also assume that Storecove are also ERP or invoicing solution provider. And I think I can go next. As a background for Storecove, we are the access point provider for PayPal and also the BNA network. And if you really familiar with PayPal invoicing, we have been doing PayPal in Singapore for the past 5 years. And in Malaysia, we are also certified access point provider, where as an access point provider, we actually facilitate the transaction, the invoicing transaction to the PayPal network, as well as to the tech authority like Malaysia and other country. And for Storecove, we have been doing this PayPal invoicing for the past 10 years already. We have been doing for more than 31 country. And how we work, we provide an API for ERP company integrator for you to help your end businesses to have connectivity to PayPal network. And for Storecove, we always to support any global format. And for Singapore, we have been doing this since 2019, and we are one of the accredited access point for Singapore. And uh, other than that, for Storecove, we also doing e-reporting, especially for the country like Malaysia, India, Germany, France, and now for Singapore, we uh, actually comply already with requirement by IRAS reporting, and currently we are inviting uh, our current customer and future customer to test together with us our API. And for Storecove, we provide free access to the sandbox for those already our client. You know how actually our sandbox work. And for new client, if you um, want to try our sandbox, we can give you free access to our sandbox, and you can test PayPal invoicing and also for CFIs reporting. And we also providing well-documented API. And currently for Singapore, we already upgrade our API document, and we already stated what is the procedure and the process, how you want to connect your client to C5 connectivity. And Storecove, we are also offering white label services where you also can become as an access point, where you can get accredited access point from IMDA. And also, if you are looking to get invoice now ready solution provider, you also can connect with our access point, and you can get certified from IMDA. And this is currently our partner. We call it as a partner. And today, I think ABSS Zero also here. And regard to the Singapore, ABSS is actually actively testing our connectivity right now. They are our partner in crime, and we always get input from them what actually we need to improve because for Singapore, not only IRSP need to uplift your solution. For AP, we also need to upgrade our access point to the IRAS API. So For next, how you want to connect for those new customer. If you're looking to connect with Storecove, you just let us know, either me or Aaron, or you can contact our help desk, and you can go to our API document where you actually can actually start the understanding how actually the API work, and just request our developer sandbox account where you can do testing. For existing client, you also need to inform Storecove, where Storecove need to some updating in, toward your current account, and then from there you can test your CFI connection. And once everything goes well and you are ready to get certified by IRAS for C5 and also get IRSP accreditation, you can go to production with us. And from there, we can sign agreement with together. And basically, Storecove, we already accredited access point for invoice now. And what is actually our unique selling point for Storecove? We are providing standard JSON format for invoicing, where you can send our standard JSON format, and we can for sending, we can transform your format to the recipient format. For example, in Malaysia, we can transform the JSON data to the LHDN format. And then for receiving, we also always translate the data from what actually your system can process. So in this case, if you able to receive PayPal invoicing, then we can translate your data from other format to the PayPal format. And then in terms of pricing, I think clear that for CFI reporting, we can charge additional pricing to our partner, and then for new client, just let us know. We have a special package for Singapore, and then just contact us or our help desk if you want our latest pricing structure. And then okay, I think that's all for me. If you have any question, please feel free to post your question in the chat. And now I want to I'll pass this stage to Aaron, and for Aaron to explain more detail about what you need to do in order for you to be prepared, and then how you can connect with Storecove access point. Aaron, over to you.
All right, thanks for that introduction, Zamri. So for the remainder of this session, I'll take a bit more 10 minutes on how the concept behind Storecove as a product, and then I'll spend a good 20 minutes in demonstrating how you would do your initial setup and start sending invoices and reporting your invoices to IRAS using Storecove's API. So you can bear with me for the next 10 minutes. Let's quickly go through about the key features of Storecove, and then we'll move on to the actual demo part. Now, some of the dates to take note of course, the early adoption is just around the corner. It's 1st May 2025. But a date that is earlier than that, 31st March 2025, is the last date for AP and IRSPs to complete their solution Uplift C5 and get the accreditation with IMDA. Now, this ties both with the grant that is being made available in Singapore, and also with your ability to be listed in the list of accredited invoice now ready service providers and also access point service providers in Malaysia. Now, there are further future dates also involved where other companies, the wave would be applicable to more set of companies come 1st November 2025. And then all companies are expected to go live by 1st April 2025. Now, the key thing about Storecove, our API combines both GST invoice reporting. And keep in mind, in Singapore, the seller who issues the invoice and the buyer who receives the invoice both have to report your GST invoices to IRAS. And now on top of that, we also provide the facility to exchange invoices electronically through the Invoice Now network in Singapore. Now, rather than looking at it as a three different paths, what Storecove have done is to combine them together into a single flow, where at the point of sending the invoices via Storecove, you have parameters that you can choose, which we'll see shortly in the demo, where you can choose only to exchange invoices as via PayPal or Invoice Now with your recipient in Singapore, or you can enable IRAS reporting, or you only enable IRAS reporting, not the PayPal transmission. So all these parameters, you can switch it on through the API body itself. Now, having said that, at the moment, Storecove have covers quite a large number sets of countries across the world. Some of these countries are listed here. This is not a definite list. It's an ever-growing list, and we keep adding more and more countries. Our development team is quite busy in ensuring we have our footprint across the world. Now, having said that, we also support compliance countries, including Europe, Asia, like Malaysia, Singapore, India, and a few other countries also. So we not only do e-invoicing, which the version of exchanging invoices between the two trading party, but we also support compliance-related invoices, for instance, mandate country, post-reporting, hard clearance, and so on. Now, having said that, we all know in IMDA, PayPal as a network is called Invoice Now. It has been around since 2019. With the proven success that Singapore have had in the last 4 years, they have now added an additional capability of enabling IRAS reporting through what is called a corner 5 model. Basically, you can use the same PayPal format and report it as a GST invoice to IRAS. Now, there's a few different functionality that is enabled, which we will see in a table shortly. Now, having said that, of course, for those who have already been doing PayPal Invoice Now exchange, we strongly encourage you to get onto the IRAS GST reporting framework. Even if your date is later, you can still start now because there's a strong advantage of why you should be doing now, right? Number one, you can already start promoting yourself as IRAS requirement compliant, and you're also contributing to the digital transformation of your customers and your partners, because by making it fully digital, you no longer have to manually report your GST invoices, and you can automate the entire process, right? Whereby every time an invoice is sent, you can automate it saying that if the invoice is accepted by a customer, automatically report it to IRAS through the C5 model, or whenever you receive an invoice, you can also, whenever it passes your internal validation, automatically report it to C5. So you can completely design a process where you can go hands-on by digitalizing both Invoice Now and IRAS reporting together. Now, having said that, sending invoices in Storecove, you start with it's independent of the network or the specification that is used within the local jurisdiction. For instance, we know in Singapore, we have the pinned SG, which is a PayPal pin format. Now, in Malaysia, you have the LHDN UBL and also a PayPal Malaysia format. In Saudi Arabia, you have UBL 2.1. In India, you have JSON. So you got a lot of formats to remember of and take care of, right? Now, with Storecove, what you do is you do a single JSON format output. We would do the job of converting them to the local required format. So if in Singapore it's pin SG, it doesn't mean you send the format to us in pin SG. And then when you have to send an invoice from Malaysia, you have to change it to LHDN UBL. No. Regardless, whichever country you connect with us for, you always send the JSON in our network. Now, this JSON data catalog is published in our Storecove API document that we can see together later. Now, the same thing for sending again, generally as a service provider or a technology provider or whatever that you develop, what you would do is that you would have a module that first archives the API and always converts the file into the JSON format. And then you would push the file into the Storecove API. And then you would generate a sales invoice based on the different combination of data parameters. And then you would send it and process it via Storecove. Now, when it reaches Storecove network, it can be exchanged in multiple different networks. First, we always attempt to exchange it to PayPal or DBNE network. And then if there's a compliance framework or mandate framework involved, we would also push it through that framework. And finally, if the PayPal network fails, we would simply take the file and send it to you via email. Now, having said that, moving on, the same process is reversed for receiving. For receiving, as how you would send it in a JSON format, you will also receive it in a JSON format. So again, the same data catalog, the same structure. So you can set up the middleware or any processing engine you might have in your internal system, and then it will work both for sending and receiving together. Now, having said that, we would move towards a recommended integrator flow that we recommend by using Storecove as an API, and how you would roll it out for your customers, or you as a development team, you might roll it out within your organization. Of course, all this we can visualize shortly in our API demo. And now at Storecove, you see Storecove is on the far right, and then the customer or the party who sends or receives invoices is on the far left. Now, we encourage a middleware layer as an integrator or development or processing engine, which fetches the file from the ERP system of the customer or the sender or receiver, or you can wait until they push it to you, convert it to a JSON file, have a management UI or event processing queue, and push it through Storecove. Now, if you notice here, we support multiple countries. You don't have to set up separate connection for different countries. You would always send to the same API endpoint. We would take care of which country that is applicable for, depending on the different set of parameters that we have set up for. Now, let's go to Storecove API demo. Now, with Singapore, there's a KYC process through Corpus. And let me share my screen. All right, so I hope my entire screen is visible. Now, if you notice, as soon as you log into Storecove, then I'll make sure I have the deck open. Okay, so when you have created an account with Storecove, you will be given a login access depending on the type of account. It can be an integrated account or a company account. And your UI might differ. So we got 3 different set of accounts in Storecove. We have integrator and APAC account, which is an access point as a service provider, and a company account. Now, really the difference is if you're an integrator account, it means that you're providing integration services for your customers. If you are an APAC account, that means that you might have, let's say, a cloud accounting system where you want to automate the onboarding of your customers through your platform to our platform. Now, when you create a new legal entity for Singapore, as you see, if you put in a name, let's say SG Demo C5, and then you change the country to Singapore, you would see some of our input field will also attempt to change, right? Now, the key thing to note here is that once all this change, you would also have an SGUEN to fill in. Now, if you notice here, the SGUEN is the UN ID, but keep in mind at Storecove, not only for Singapore, it's for any countries that we operate in, we always put in the prefix of how you have to fill in the UN. In this case, it always leads with SGUEN, and then you put in the UN number. Now, I know this sometimes catches people off guard, but you're not doing it correct if the field remains red. So what you have to do is, once you put in the right number, you can see the field changes green. Now, this is a UN ID, which I have already activated, so I can go in and submit and request for validation. Now, the key thing here is that in some countries, Singapore primarily, when a new account that is created in Storecove system, we can automatically push it to the invoice now SMP. We have to do some background check first. Now, as part of that, once you click save and request validation, what's going to happen is this part here, it's going to say validation in progress. Of course, I don't have anything to show here that it says validation in progress. So either going to say once validation in progress, that takes about 24 to 48 hours generally for Storecove to do the due diligence on your account. Once that's completed, we would either say it succeeded or failed. Now, if it succeeded, the next thing you have to do is that you have to enable the entity at the invoice now SMP. Now, because this is validation succeeded and it is already done, what really happens is that if you look at this, once it's in a validation successful state, you would have the button called push to SMP. Now, once you click on this push to SMP, that's when the triggering to Corpus is done. Now, the interesting thing here is that you can notice I did this 2 days ago. I was out for dinner when this email came up, and then by the time I'm done with my dinner, I came back, the token has expired. So what's important here is that when you're going to perform this push to SMP, make sure you're doing it where you are available at least for the next 1 or 2 hours. Because if you're not, the token expires and you have to redo the entire validation process again. Now, if you did it right, you would get this email, and now you should have a COPAS access at that point. You will see who you have activated the customer with. So just click to authorize the account. Now, once it's authorized, what's going to happen is, with that, it means you have now onboarded a legal entity onto the Singapore SMP. After you have done that, the most important thing with Singapore is with the new C5, you now will have to do, you'll say SMP PayPal IMDA Sandbox, and then it shows which environment that is. The status will show provision, and then you have to click Activate C5. Now, once you click Activate C5, what this really does is that it connects to the IRAS API and registers you and broadcasts that you're now ready to start reporting GST invoices to IRAS directly. Now, having said that, again, that's already an entity I've done. So once you click Activate C5, you're going to get an email again from the same email as this, SGNIC, which you have to authorize again. Again, keep in mind, do it when you have that availability to perform this action within the next 1 or 2 hours. Now, once you have performed this action, what Storecove does is we poll for the status every 5 minutes. Back then, we used to do it only once an hour, but we have improved the polling mechanism now. So that status should automatically reflect at Storecove for you to see. Now, next, let's look at, so that's really, it takes care of you setting up a legal entity, where first you create a legal entity in the InvoiceNow network, and then you activate the C5 IRAS reporting. Once that's done, now you have a perfectly set up legal entity where you can start sending or receiving invoices via InvoiceNow and reporting them to GST now. Now, the first thing you want to do is to set up Postman. If you're testing our API for the first time, we always encourage you to use an independent tool to test drive our SMP. Now, to do that, you can go to our API documentation, and you would see here, you can follow the steps along. Now, if you're going to set up Postman for the first time, what you have to do is that you will have to go here. If you control search Postman, you can download Postman as an application. You can see I've already downloaded. And then you can download this Postman API file. So you just right-click, click Save Linked As, and then it should already download and save it in your local drive. Once you have done that, you would open your Postman, and then you go here and you would import the API file. So I would click this, and I would attempt to import the API file. And then you can see, you can choose. I've not really tried choosing the different version, but I think it works the same for both. And then you can see it is downloading. Now, because I already have a library, it created a copy. I'm going to remove this. Or actually, I'll show you. Now, when you open the library, you can see there's a few things. Now, back then we had invoice submission. Since then, we have added document submission that supports not only invoice, it supports wider type of document types. Legal entity is where you can create an account or not. Now, again, for Singapore, it's slightly different. You cannot create a legal entity directly from the API unless we authorize it. Because in Singapore, we are legally required to perform a KYC process before a legal entity can be enabled. However, we still allow you to create legal entity via the API, but you would need to have a different access that you have to write to us to get it. Now, if you also notice the activity that we performed just now, a legal entity, you can see the C5 activation and C5 deactivation. You can actually perform, if you have the right access with us, you can perform the activation directly through our API. So you have C5 IRAS, you can do an email activation, activate or deactivate or cancel, or you can do a redirect. Redirect is like a payment portal where the user would get a redirect link where they can enable and activate, and the process will be completed. Now, then you can go ahead and look at reporting purchase invoices, webhook, discovery, and receive document. Now, what we recommend is that once you have set up your API, the first thing you want to do is that you can actually use our API. Now, what we notice is that a lot of our users get stuck at not putting the right authorization key. So in order to make sure that you can successfully talk to our API, we suggest that perform a discovery test first. Now, this is also mentioned as part of our API guideline. Should be here. Discovery. So you can see this, and this is the simplest way to know that you are successfully connected and you can successfully talk to Storecove. Now, where we notice most of the issue is when the authorization check that you do. Now, if you notice here, it says authorization. Every API communication with Storecove needs an authorization. Now, and your authorization must be in this format. Now, here I said inherit authorization from parent, which means I've already defined it at parent level. So basically, the authorization will need to be in the format where the key has to say authorization, value has to be bearer. It starts with a bearer prefix and then your actual API key. Now, where would you get your API key? You would go here, and depending on your access, it might be in different locations. But for me, I'll go setting, I'll go to API key, and then I have my list of API key listed. Now you can see it's hashed. Just click the I button, you can see your API key. Take the API key and set it up in your Postman, and then it should work now. I clicked the wrong thing, but so it should work already. Now, once that's done, you're now free to test the API. So if you click, yes, you can see the status is 200. Okay, remember you're just testing. 200 means you successfully managed to speak to Storecove and it's all working. Now, a lot of the time, what we see is that we have a situation where support ticket that we get, someone, it's always a situation where they haven't set up an authorization key. So if I put no auth, then I attempt to do this again. Let me see, no auth. And a lot of the requests that we see, we always get this 403, 401, 402. Now, whenever you get this, it just simply means that you haven't set up your API key correctly or your authorization in your Postman correctly. Now, that sums up our Postman setup. Now we can start sending our first invoices. Sending invoices and retrieving status messages. Now, of course, the question is also, can I get a sample of the JSON? Now, you can go to our API documentation and see all the different catalog, but I know sometimes it can get very overwhelming because of the sheer number of data points we support. So you just simply go here, go for the country that you're trying to test for, click on Singapore. Now, before that, if you're just sending a normal PayPal invoices or you're just trying random country, you can click this, send your first invoice. You can see we have provided sample, generic sample, minimum sample for some of the countries. You already have a sample for Singapore, Singapore to Singapore. But if you're specifically trying to test according to the latest framework with IRAS reporting, you can go here. And then if you go to one of these, let me show you. Okay, so you can see the 6 scenarios for IRAS. For sending, we send B2B invoice via PayPal. The invoice is automatically routed, blah, blah, blah. I'll show you a summary of that shortly. And then this is a sample file that says how would you send to PayPal first and then IRAS. Remember, this is a subset of the wider sample. Now, if you just paste this, the system is not going to know who you are sending it from. The system always needs you to identify or indicate the legal entity that you're sending the invoice from. Now, if you look at it, I will show you. You can see I've just tested it, and then I did submit an new invoice, PayPal and IRAS, and submit an invoice to IRAS only. Of course, you can do PayPal only. It's just a different data parameter, right? Now, if you look at this, it says legal entity 341248. This is important. You always have to indicate this legal entity. If you don't have it, it should see what happens. So you can say it will say 422 unprocessable entity. Again, this is a very common defect, or sorry, not a defect, a common support ticket that we get, and that's again because you haven't indicated who the legal entity you're processing the file for or the data for. Because Storecove as a platform, it supports multi-entity capability, right? So once you have done this, if it all works, again, I've tested this invoice before, you will get a GUID. Now, at this point, you would do 2 things. You want to know what's the status of this, right? So if you notice, I have get submission status. Okay, so I would go here, and then I would go to the body, and again, all this is already set up. Oh yeah, it's in parameters. So now I know why I'm doing it. So all this is already set up. So you can see the difference. Now, if you're new to API and Postman, parameters means it's in the URL itself. The header is the header level, body is the content of the JSON payload, right? So for here, evidence type, you can go for clearing and sending. The GUID was the GUID that you received earlier. Now, again, this is explained within our API documentation. Now, if you're just looking for sending, so we only have two evidence types. One is sending and one is clearing. So if you click sending, this means that you are just checking on if the invoice was successfully transmitted to the receiver. So you'll get all this information, who it was, who was the sender, who is the receiver, the actual invoice that was sent, the evidence of the invoice being sent. There's a lot of information here that you might find useful for your purpose. Or if you're looking at clearance, remember clearance means GST reporting. And if I click that, then you can see that it says now the sender is you again, but the receiver is IRAS. And then here is where you will get all the information, the different information you need, like transmission ID, the correlation ID, acknowledgement ID, document ID, all this that is required by IRAS or the C5 connectivity in Singapore. Now, you can see here the network is mentioned in Singapore IRAS, and that is actually how we control who we send the invoice to. Now, again, if I look at here, submitting an invoice to PayPal and IRAS, you can see how do we know that that you want to do for PayPal and IRAS is number one, if you put an e-identifier, it means we have to send it via PayPal or we have to attempt to send it via PayPal. If you use a network tab, that means a local network, which means you want us to also enable IRAS reporting. Now, again, we only do it if PayPal is successful, then we do IRAS reporting. Now, just keeping that in mind, if I were to submit a new invoice to IRAS only, all I have to do is remove the part which I would say you need to send to PayPal, which was the e-identifier. So if you look at it, here it has an e-identifier when I want to do PayPal. If I don't want to do PayPal, I would just simply remove the e-identifier and include routing, which is the network only. So it goes to IRAS only. Or what if you only want to do PayPal, but you don't want to do IRAS reporting? You just simply remove the network. Now, this doesn't only, it's not only applicable to Singapore, it applies to all the other countries we support where it has two different reporting and sending network. All right, now that's how you would send and retrieve evidence. Now, if I move on to the rest of my presentation, now if you let me make this a slideshow so it's bigger, right? Now, if you look at it in IRAS or in Singapore, there's different parameters on how you would dictate what type of invoice it is. Now, again, you have sending and receiving flow. You can also receive invoices via Storecove, which I'll show shortly, the webhook for that. Now, if you're sending B2B invoice via PayPal, we have an X2Y value that dictates it's a B2B, B2C, or B2G, or petty cash. All these are the scenarios mentioned by IMDA and by IRAS. So if you're only sending via PayPal, you only have to include PayPal identifier, don't include the IRAS. Now, if you send the B2B invoice via other channels, you just want to report it to IRAS, you would just simply say IRAS. Now, if you want to report a consolidated B2C transaction, you would use the X2Y value B2C. Why it's important to change it is because if you still place it as B2B, it will attempt to look for the receiver's UEN number. Now, if you put B2C, then it bypasses the receiver UEN validation. Now, the same thing applies for B2B. It's an exact reverse, except for receiving, you have a category that is mentioned by IRAS as petty cash. So you just indicate that in X2Y value as petty cash. Now, the last thing I wanted to show is that, remember earlier, as part of my demonstration, I was showing how you would send an invoice and look for the status of that invoice that you just sent or reported to IRAS. Same thing happens for receiving. But you don't want to be polling for this and checking when you would get the update, right? So maybe it's not a step where every minute you try to poll. What you can do is you can set up a webhook. Now, how you would do that is again you will log in to your. It's interesting. You would log into your sandbox, your Storecove account, and then you go to settings, go to webhook. And then what you have to do is that, remember, you have to set up different webhook for document submission, receive document. Document submission means you send a document and you want to be notified on the status. That status only applies for clearing. Receive document means someone sent you a document, you want to be able to fetch it when it's available. So you create a webhook, then you have to choose whether it's for sending result or new document received. And then you have to say where you want it to be posted. So you have two options. One is we send the webhook to the URL that you want us to send it to, or you would prefer to poll if the webhook is available. This is generally when you don't have the capability to set up webhook. So you just pull if any new webhook is available, pull the webhook, and then fetch the data. And then you'll put in the URL, and then you can even put authentication and then decide what kind of authentication you want. Now, again, you have to do it separately for sending and receiving document. It's not one single webhook that supports both. Now, having said that, that brings us to an end of our demonstration. Now, thank you very much for being with us. Sorry we missed Zamri's email. So I'm gonna edit this on the file so you guys have the contact detail. So that's our contact detail. Now, if you have any questions, do send us the questions and we'll be